Hey there, welcome to the Social Business Engine podcast, the podcast that showcases thought leaders in modern business getting results through social media. I'm your host, Bernie Borges of Find and Convert. On episode 70, you're going to meet John Yembrick. John is the head of social media at NASA. John believes that there's a transformation underway in the way that people communicate. And his work at NASA allows him to lead with some of the most compelling content in the world. Now, John is an advocate for changing business as usual. And I can't wait to hear his response to my one thing question. John is a much sought after keynote speaker and panelist on digital communications and social media strategy. Now, before I bring John in, I want to highlight the key takeaway from this podcast. You are going to be blown away by what you learn about how NASA is using social media to communicate. And I want to encourage you to think about ways that you can communicate what your business does in a way that touches people's humanity. No matter your industry, I challenge you, and I'm confident that John wants to challenge you to touch people's humanity bone in your digital communication strategy. Well, with that, here is my interview with John Yembrick, head of social media at NASA. John, welcome to the Social Business Engine podcast.
Thanks for having me, Bernie. Great to be here.
Terrific. Well, John, for the two listeners somewhere in the world, perhaps outside the United States, that don't know what NASA is, how about we begin with just a very quick overview of NASA, and then let's talk about your role at NASA specifically.
Sure. It's interesting because everywhere I've gone around the world, people know what NASA is. I feel like you can go to outer Mongolia and people know what NASA. We were of course, in the 1969, the first humans to ever set foot on another world during the Apollo 11 mission. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin first went to the moon. Really, that was one of those things that everyone was gathered around their television set across the planet watching this milestone happen. And then we went to the moon several times after that. And then, of course, we have an International Space Station. And people, for a little while there, people wondered what NASA, which is the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, was doing. And so my role, which you ask, is trying to show people and make it relevant to their lives. NASA, I feel like during a period of time, you talk about these big milestones NASA does, like we flew the first space shuttle mission. And of course, when things didn't go right and when things went horribly wrong with space shuttle missions, that made big news. Mm-hmm. But there was lots of things that happened at NASA in between that nobody was paying attention to, that news media weren't putting on this, the evening news, and it wasn't the front page of the New York Times. And a lot of those things, my job is to show the world what their space agency, America's space agency, is working on. And that is tremendous things. I mean, we have, when you learn about the climate and climate change, a lot of that data, most of that data comes from NASA satellites and NASA research. Mm-hmm. When you get in an airplane, there's technology on that airplane, commercial aircraft, military aircraft, that comes from NASA technology and comes from, we're making aircraft safer, more fuel efficient. We're helping to train and make air traffic safety better. So we have an International Space Station. You talked about humanity in your earlier. We have an International Space Station that's 250 miles above the planet, where humans have lived off the planet for, since 2000. Mm-hmm. So 15 years, humans, a 15-year-old doesn't know a world where humans haven't lived permanently off of Earth. Yeah. And so there's this profound element in NASA too. So overall, we do all of these great things. We are looking out of the solar system. We're looking out beyond the solar system to other galaxies and other star systems. And so that's what NASA does. And there's so many elements to the space agency. And I feel like my job, along with my social media team at NASA, it's to do two main things: show all the main work that NASA is doing, and make us relevant in the world, and also engage an audience so people can feel like they can participate with NASA and take part in this great journey with us.
Okay, now there's a few things you said, John, that I actually want to kind of unpack a little bit. First of all, I agree with you that probably most people across this planet know who NASA is. But there's one element of it that I don't know that everybody understands, and that is that NASA, correct me if I'm wrong, John, is a government agency. but yet you behave like a brand. The things that you just said in terms of your role are things that marketers say at brands, and NASA is a government agency. So my question for you, John, is when did NASA start to think like and behave like a brand?
Yeah, NASA is not like other federal agencies. We talk and we work closely with our government colleagues. And there is a working group in the government where we share best practices with each other. But the model for NASA is much different than, let's say, the Social Security Administration or the IRS. A lot of what they do is service oriented, customer service oriented, showing what resources are available, that sorts of thing. That's really not what NASA does. And so our model is different. And what we do is very similar to a brand, like you mentioned. I mean, we're trying to promote a product, and that product is space exploration. And when you look at that and you basically summarize it, why are we so different? If you go back to the Space Act of NASA, it's actually in our Space Act. It says very simply and clearly, we're supposed to, part of our mission is to provide for the widest practical and appropriate dissemination information to the largest audience possible. And so that is in our charter, so to speak. And that is very different. And I think the reason for that really stems from the fact that our content isn't just about, hey, this is what NASA's doing, but this is what NASA's doing, how it's affecting your life. There are spin-off technologies that impact you. There are things that should inspire you and hopefully will inspire young people to want to study careers in science, technology, engineering, and math. So it is a really different world. And we do have a product. And that product, it sounds strange and corny, is exploration and inspiration.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so continuing down this path of NASA as a brand with a product to sell, to market. So how do you identify, you kind of touched on it, but I want to come back to it. How do you identify who your target audience is?
Yeah, it really, it's one of the interesting things about NASA is we have 500 accounts across the agency. So you can say you might be interested in, I mentioned aeronautics earlier, you might be really interested in that element of NASA and not care so much about the space element side of it. So you can follow our aeronautics accounts and you can see what new technologies are coming. You can see what research we're doing in the aeronautics field. And that is the gift of having 500 social media accounts. There's voice now for those little things NASA's doing. It doesn't have to be a broad stroke. When you had the space shuttle program, for example, it kind of put a shadow over all these other elements NASA was working because it was so big and dominated so much of what people knew NASA to be. When the space shuttle retired, a lot of people assumed NASA was retiring. And they weren't thinking about all these other things. They didn't know about all these other things NASA did. I can't tell you how many times I'd say I worked for NASA right after the shuttle retired, and I go, are you guys still around? I thought you guys were going out of business. And wow. It's like you roll your eyes and like we weren't doing something right as a communication organization there. So to answer your question, I feel like for us, overall, people ask us who our target audience is. I say humanity. And I say that, and I do get eye rolls. I get people like, really? Humanity? Can you be more specific? But I'll tell you, like I said earlier, Bernie, there's something for everybody in NASA. And I could talk, every human being looks up the night sky and sees the stars. And since the dawn of time and wonders what's up there? What are those? Is there life out there? What is beyond Earth? And NASA's answering some of those fundamental questions that have been asked, like I said, very early on throughout. And I think it's almost intrinsic in humans to be asking these type of questions. So we're helping solving, putting little pieces of the puzzle together there. But you also, you don't have to be so broad and philosophical about it. NASA on the International Space Station, for example, we're doing biomedical research. And that research is helping fight diseases here on Earth. Those do have a direct impact on people's lives. Do you know that that's happening? Probably not. Do you know that some of the tools they're using in hospitals come from NASA technology? You don't. And so it's our job to put those in front of you. And I think there's a story for everybody. I mean, your grandmother may have osteoporosis, not know that we're doing bone loss medical research on the International Space Station to help mitigate that. That's the kind of thing that can connect with everybody. It's getting that story in front of them so they're aware of what we're doing.
That's fascinating. So, okay, you said so much, and I'm thinking, how do I limit my next question or two to stay within our time allotment here? John, you said that you've got 500 social media accounts. That is mind-blowing, and I promised my listeners that we would blow their minds with what we covered here today. That alone is mind-blowing. There's so many brands across so many different industries that have one social media account, for every social media platform, or a small number. What's your decision process? How did you get to 500? What is that decision process to add another social media account?
Well, to start off with, we didn't have a process. So people just willy-nilly went on and opened an account and told us about it, may or may not told us about it. Sometimes we just discovered things like, oh, I didn't know there was 3 International Space Station science accounts out there. So when we discovered that, we would then try to consolidate them. There's one now science space station account. But NASA is interesting because we are so large. There's 10 field centers across the country, across the United States. They each have very different roles in the agency, but they almost work like little islands. So they don't always talk to each other. Each field center has their own social media lead. And so the process that we have, and then of course there's missions, projects, and programs, those field centers. So the process that we have for new accounts and anything that needs to be coordinated is those missions. Let's take the Hubble Space Telescope, for example. That's based out of Goddard Research Center in Flight Research Center in Maryland. The Hubble folks should work directly with the social media lead at Goddard, and then we work directly with that social media lead. So if they want to open a new account, some mission at Goddard wants to start talking, let's say Hubble doesn't have a Pinterest account and they want one, they would work through an approval process. We actually have a form they fill out, and the form asks pretty simple questions like, are you really going to be able to maintain this account? Is there another account that exists where you can feed this content that already has an audience? Why start from scratch? And so that goes up to us. First goes to social media manager at the center, and then up to us, and we evaluate them on a case-by-case basis. But to really answer your question, there is structure now. There wasn't always, but having 500 accounts is a good thing. I mean, a lot of these missions I talked about before didn't have a voice. You didn't know there was space station science happening. You didn't know what the Chandra X-ray Observatory was doing. You didn't know what the work of NASA Ames Research Center was doing. Now they have their own voice in the world, and that's a positive thing.
And they're all able to tell their unique story. Okay,
yes.
Cool. So, John, as you know, business is in business to conduct business, which means they need to measure results. And everybody that uses social media, and we talk about that here on the Social Business Engine podcast, measures results. Are you tasked with measuring results? And if so, how?
It's an interesting question. Tasked is probably not the right word to use. It's really more of an evaluation to what does well and what doesn't, and what we should amplify and what we shouldn't. If we're going to go back to your audience being humanity, you really want to try to connect a story to people that resonates. Now, that said, you also have things that need to be told. There's smaller stories that the other accounts can post, but we were looking at Big NASA, the at NASA brand, what they should be putting out, what we put out on those accounts. It's really, you have big stories that need to be told, news stories that we can't ignore. And then there's everything else. And everything else means trying to find something that will resonate and connect with an audience. So what we do is we do evaluations. So we had recently, for example, we had this New Horizons spacecraft, which took 9 years to get to Pluto. It flew by Pluto in one day. It went zipped by Pluto, took a bunch of images and data and sent that back to Earth. And then we'll never go again. It's not going to come back to Pluto. We have no other spacecraft going to Pluto. So that was our one shot. And so we did a report. We did a report on how well it did, what posted well, what our numbers were before and after. So that also helps us justify doing similar things in the future and growing our presence on social. But I will say this one thing, it's important to note, our management from the very beginning in Office of Communication at NASA has been a big advocate for social. So we haven't had to justify what we do traditionally, like I know some organizations have to do. What it is now is just seeing how we can do better and how we can reach more people with these numbers.
Okay, terrific. That's really interesting. And the whole New Horizons, Pluto's pictures thing was just fascinating, and really social media just lit up around the world with that. So that was really, really outstanding. John, what about the fact that space travel is becoming more commercialized? What kind of an impact, if any, is that having on NASA's role and your role in how you use social media?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for those who don't know, NASA is, let's say commercialized. There's a paradigm shift in NASA to where it used to be, which was NASA procured services and built their own spacecraft, right? The space shuttle belonged to NASA. Now what we're doing is we're buying services from commercial in hopes, and it's already coming to fruition, the commercial will grow and create a thriving space industry that's self-sufficient and doesn't rely on NASA. That's the goal of the commercial side of things,
Mm-hmm.
and that frees up NASA to explore, to go off to do things like go to Mars and asteroid, and keep the low Earth orbit to commercial side. And so what we do is we fly cargo to the National Space Station, for example, on commercial spacecraft. Which is different. We never really did that before. We used the space shuttle prior to that, and then the Russian Progress and our international partners like the European Space Agency and the Japanese Space Agency. They were flying cargo. So this is a different way to look at things, and so we do have to work closely. One thing that's different is it's not in our control. If
Mm-hmm.
they are slipping a launch date or something, it's not ours to report. That is their story to tell, not ours. And so that is different. And we have to work closely with our partners in commercial, and we do. That is something that is different. And we're still in the learning process to how to perfect it. But ultimately, for example, SpaceX is one of our cargo delivery carriers to the National Space Station.
Mm-hmm.
We have to work closely with them in pre-launch planning, post-launch planning, all of those sorts of things. So it's more of a partnership now than exclusively NASA. Space is for everybody.
So using SpaceX as an example, that's an American company, if I'm not
Yes.
mistaken. And so in terms of how you use social media, is there any kind of an impact on how you use it when you're partnering with a company like SpaceX?
Well, it's important to know that I think when we're posting everything, we have to make sure that we're referencing SpaceX.
Right.
It is not ours. I mean, it's our cargo in there, but it's their launch vehicle, it's their spacecraft. And if there is something happening, for example, there was a launch anomaly several weeks ago,
Mm-hmm.
and that was something we had to work closely on the language we wanted to share with them because, again, we can talk about things that are public on social, and that's primarily what we do, Bernie. We don't create content. We take content and repackage it for social.
I was just going to say, you actually, you kind of segued to another question that I wanted to pose to you, John, and that is when something happens that, is not exactly according to plan, and maybe it's, bad news. How do you handle that? I mean, all brands that are active in social have to be prepared for that. So how are you prepared for that, and how do you handle it?
It's interesting. I think crisis management is something that is almost a day-to-day thing in NASA. You can have something happen aboard the International Space Station where humans are living in this closed loop environment off the planet. There's been ammonia leaks or emergencies, alarms going off, that sort of things. There's debris, orbital debris that sometimes the space station has to maneuver to avoid that could be bad. You have spacecraft that are hurling through space that could break down anytime. You have spacecraft that re-enter, and we don't know where they're going to go sometimes. So fortunately, they usually land in the Pacific Ocean, which is, of course, the majority of the planet is water. But these are sorts of things we have to track that could have a heavily impact us in a negative way. So crisis communication is a very important element of social, and we work closely and we have a crisis plan for everything. We talked about New Horizons earlier.
Mm-hmm.
We had pre-written language if we had a bad day. If somehow the spacecraft got damaged, we didn't know just the smallest thing, something the size of a grain of rice, could permanently damage the New Horizons spacecraft. And we would 9 years, 3 billion miles, and we would maybe not get the science that we wanted from it. Could be devastating, and it would be a big PR mess, so to speak. So we have pre-written language for that sort of thing. I'll tell you, when the SpaceX launch failure happened, that day, I re-vetted the language we would use in case of an accident. And if you were following the launch on social media, you would have found out and discovered that this accident happened within seconds of it actually happening. I was a matter of copy pasting the language that we pre-wrote, putting it into a post, and pressing send, and it happened very, very quickly. I'm proud of that. It's timeliness in crisis communication is the most important thing, and openness as well. Our job as a government agency, particularly, is to be as open as possible. We're trying to get this information out fast and accurately.
Yeah. Well, there's so many ways that you act like a brand. NASA is acting like a brand, and you and in your leadership role are really exemplary of that, John. So that's terrific. I want to talk about something that my listeners perhaps are getting tired of hearing me talk about it, but I don't tire of talking about it, and that's the concept of employee advocacy. We talk a lot about it here, and it's just because it's an important element of where we are in how brands communicate through digital. And so my question to you is, probably the most prominent persona in NASA is the astronaut. But the astronaut is not the only role at NASA. So I'd like to know, to what extent are astronauts involved in being active online through social and storytelling, and what other roles or personas are active at NASA?
Bernie, I could go on for a bit about employee advocacy in NASA, because most people working at NASA love their jobs. It's in government, year after year, the best place to work in government is NASA. I think it's the content and the people and the type of work people are doing that they really, really enjoy. And it's not just astronauts and scientists we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
NASA has human resource people. We have secretaries, and we have administrative. There's everybody seems to universally, as a whole, really enjoy their jobs, and we want to encourage people to talk about their work. That said, as a federal agency, it has to be very careful not to blur the lines between what is official account and what is someone's personal account. So if you want to talk about the work you're doing privately, that's your prerogative. But we also want to be very careful about telling people to use personal accounts to talk about NASA. That's something we don't want to do, because then their account almost is de facto official account. So there has to be a line drawn there. So I do want to make that point. I know some companies encourage it. We don't discourage it, but we certainly, on an official basis, we don't tell people, hey, talk about this new discovery on your personal accounts. We would not want to do that, because who knows? That person might also post something that we find objectionable on their personal account.
Right. Do you provide training or guidance or governance to employees?
Yeah, we have guidances. It's interesting. NASA doesn't have a social media policy by design. We decided that wasn't the approach we want to take. A lot of organizations and federal agencies rush to put a policy in place, and we didn't feel that was necessary. There's already policies in place for how employees should be communicating. Just the same way you can send an email out and put your information out there, or pick up a phone and tell NASA story.
Right.
Social media is just another channel to do that. And so instead of reinventing the wheel, we're just referring back to the policies that already exist. So I do want to answer your question, though, about astronauts, because I think that's really an important element. They're doing something I can't do and you can't do, and that's travel in space.
Yeah.
And they look at the Earth from the orbital perspective. I mean, I'll never get to do that. So that is an important thing that they can do. Mm-hmm. Back in the 2009, when we tried to get astronauts to use social media for the first time, it was a bit of a silence. No one wanted to do it. One astronaut stepped up, not even knowing what Twitter was, and said he would do it. It was aboard the space shuttle. You didn't have internet access. And he would basically write 140 characters, email to the ground, and we post his account. It was very honest about how we were doing it. Later on, we have now internet access and direct. People can actually tweet directly from the space station now. But we still have ground support people helping them. But I will tell you, we have 49 astronauts active on social media right now that are 49. On social media.
Wow.
Yeah. So you went from 0 to 1 to 49 pretty quickly. And now I think the value has been shown. I think that people see it as a way to connect that story from space to us down here on Earth. And so right now we have Scott Kelly, who's on a 1-year mission aboard space station. Today at 5:02, today is July 22nd at 5:02 p.m. Kjell Lindgren is another NASA astronaut. He's launching to the space station. And he's going to be on Instagram, and he's going to be on Twitter. And so it's not so much it's more of a fight as an agency now to get people not to be on social media. Everybody wants an account now. So we almost have like a stick and push them away a little bit. But
what a contrast back to 2009, right?
Absolutely. There was fear back in 2009, and now I think they get it. And but you're right. I mean, these are official accounts, and astronauts also have to be mindful about what's personally they post and what they post officially. So
yeah. Okay, John, before I ask you my one thing question, and I can't wait to hear your response, I do want to ask you one other question. And that is, clearly by now in these 20 or so minutes that we've been chatting on this podcast, it is clear that NASA thinks like, acts like, behaves like, and is a brand, but you're a government agency. So what I'd like you to share is what's the biggest lesson that you've learned in your role at NASA that our listeners who are typically in a business corporate setting might benefit from?
Yeah, one of the things that I think we built a strong community and at NASA, and I know that sometimes I try to tell this to other organizations and I get blank stares because the way of doing things traditionally, it's very difficult to get a communicator to think differently because they've been trained a certain way. They know certain buzzwords, they want to use them publicly, that sort of thing. I get this notion that social media is not just a way to connect people behind a two-dimensional screen, but it's a way to actually get real human beings involved. And so one of the things we do at NASA, which has been incredibly successful, is we take the online experience offline. We have something start off as a tweet ups, then it turned and morphed into, because we didn't want it basically just on one platform, we call it a NASA social program, where anyone who's active on social media can apply to attend a NASA event, for example, a launch. And then you come out to a launch, you can get behind the scenes experience, you can meet the administrator, the deputy administrator, and astronauts, and see these things that other people can't see. And what we give you this access in the hopes that you'll go out there and share it with your friends and family on social media. So we did this, and it was a tremendous success. I mean, people were coming out there, and it was really amplifying our message to people we might not normally reach. But what came from that, we always knew they would come out and meet us, but we never really thought that they would come out and meet each other and form this great community. There is a NASA social community has a Facebook group page where they share NASA information with each other. They have meetings where they have teleconferences where they talk about NASA. And so it's really morphed into something much bigger than us. And isn't that what everyone wants? Don't people want, I mean, word of mouth marketing is so important. You get other people to say that if I say I'm the world's greatest hamburger, sure, you're saying it, you're a burger company. But if the public is saying that, or really if your friend tells you that, you're going to take a lot more value to it. So we take that very seriously. And so when the government shut down not too long ago, one of the things that happened was the community stepped in and they had a hashtag things NASA might tweet, and they kept the conversation going for us. Even though we weren't permitted by law to be posting stuff, our story was still being told by our community, and that's a powerful asset. And so I think that whether you're an ice cream store or you're a big brand, I think there's a story of customers that will be interested in learning. Maybe you bring them behind the scenes. Maybe you find another way to connect with them. But I think really engaging your community, not just putting information out there to them, but bringing them inside is really important. I think that's one of the things that my most valuable lesson. I got to tell you, I was when the government shut down, I was just following from behind the scenes, couldn't post, and I was very, very proud of this community that we built.
I bet. Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. The only thing that I would add that you said, maybe you didn't use this word, I don't think you used this word, and that's when you started the social events, that was an experiment, wasn't it? You took a little bit of risk because you didn't know how it was going to go until you tried it.
Yeah, tweet ups have been around. A lot of time it was about, hey, let's meet people that were on Twitter. This going back to 2008. Hey, let's meet at a bar. Our relationship is just online. Let's take it offline.
Right.
And that was really the point of the tweet up that was happening. And so we had a story for our Mars Phoenix lander that we wanted to tell, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And yes, it absolutely was an experiment. We didn't know we would do more than that. So it went from that first one to start inviting people out to launches. And really much every launch we've had, all but one that I can think of since 2009, we have had this in-person NASA social event tweet up at because it is so successful. Yeah. I got to tell you, the community keeps growing and growing. And every time we have an event, a lot of those alumni keep applying. They want to keep attending. They want to. They sometimes start off as like mildly interested in space, and then they leave an uber space geek. And what more could you ask?
I can only imagine. That's fantastic. Well, John, we are close to being out of time, but I need a segue to ask you my one thing question. And as I said in my intro, I can't wait to hear your response. And here it is. If there's any one thing that you could change about the way that business is conducted today, what would that be?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, and I could answer probably three or four things, but you're asking for one. And I think the frustrating thing we feel being a government agency is how much these social media platforms depend on advertising dollars to really to get amplify your message. We have over 10 million likes on Facebook, for example, on the main NASA channel, and not everybody sees all of our content that wants to, because if we bought advertising, it would be much more accessible to people. So I think that is one frustrating element. We talk about social media as like a new media that supplements traditional media, but there are limitations to how many people can get access to your content who really want to. And so I think if there's something I could change in the element, it'd make it so anyone who wants to see NASA's information that's on some of these platforms can see NASA's information. I don't think it should be so closed-looped.
Okay, terrific. Thank you for that. Well, John, as we segue into my outro here, let's let people know how they can either connect with you on Twitter or wherever you want to send them. And we don't have time to list all 500 NASA social media accounts. So if you want to list one or two that people might want to follow, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I feel like I'm a little biased because me and my colleague Jason Townsend are primarily the ones who post to the main NASA flagship accounts. But I really encourage everybody to follow us on Twitter at NASA, NASA on Facebook, NASA on Google+, NASA on Instagram. Those are our main channels we're on right now. I will tell you, I believe that NASA on Instagram is the best Instagram account there is. You don't believe me? Go to it. Look at those images. I mean,
it's awesome.
There's this amazing stuff. And every day there's something mind blowing. And we don't just post images to post images. Jason and I look at every new image that comes out, and we carefully craft them and curate them and make sure that it is the most powerful thing we have out there. And so we have just yesterday posted, for example, a flyover of Pluto 15-second video. I mean, where else are you going to get this stuff on Instagram?
Right.
It's out of this world. Literally.
It is, literally, in more ways than one. Well, John Yembrick, head of social media at NASA, and please give a shout out to Jason as well, because he is also your partner in crime, doing a fantastic job. Thank you so much for joining me here today on the Social Business Engine podcast. I really, really appreciate your time and all these wonderful insights. And John, before I actually sign off, I just want to remind my audience of a couple things that I think by now they know, and that is that things we discuss here today are going to be available at our show notes at socialbusinessengine.com/podcasts. And I really want to encourage people to think about the things that we've discussed here today, John, in terms of how any brand can do storytelling and really kind of touch that humanity bone. I think NASA is really exemplary at that, and really love just hearing the progress and the story behind your journey as well. I also want to remind people that we're always asking for rates and reviews on iTunes. That's the way that people can discover our podcast, and we make that easy on our website. Just go to socialbusinessengine.com/iTunes, and there's a link directly to our podcast. And of course, while you're on our website, I would encourage you to subscribe so that you receive each podcast episode delivered to your email inbox, which we send every Friday. And that, of course, is also available at socialbusinessengine.com. And that is a wrap for episode 70 of Social Business Engine. This is Bernie Borges, once again thanking my guest, John Yembrick from NASA. And I wish you continued success on your social business journey.